The shuttle docked with a heavy clang that rattled every loose bolt in the cargo bay, and Sergeant Lena Vasquez grabbed the reinforced carrier crate beside her before it could slide off the bench. Something inside the crate hissed. "Yeah, I know," she muttered, pressing her palm against the wire mesh door where a pair of black eyes glared back at her with the kind of raw fury that most species reserved for mortal enemies. "I hate space travel too," she added. The crate shook as the creature inside threw itself against the walls for the fourth time since they had left Earth orbit, and Lena just sighed and lifted the whole thing onto her shoulder as the airlock cycled open. Station Zurath 9 hit her senses all at once. The recycled air carried the sharp tang of alien chemicals, and the heavy musk of animals she could not even begin to identify. And the noise was a wall of growls and shrieks and deep rumbling calls that vibrated in her chest like standing next to a thunderstorm. Subwoofer. She had arrived at the Galactic Bonded Companion Expo, the most prestigious beast handler competition in 3-star sectors, and she was almost certainly the least prepared participant in its 400-year history. Lena limped through the arrivals corridor on her bad left knee, the one that had never healed right after the mining colony incident on Kepler 442b, and she followed the illuminated floor guides toward the registration hall, while every alien she passed turned to stare at her. She was used to the staring by now, because humans were still new to the galactic stage, and most species treated them like a curiosity, something to observe and poke at, but never take seriously. The registration hall was enormous, a vaulted chamber the size of a football stadium, filled with handlers and their bonded companions, and Lena stopped in the doorway to take it all in. To her left, a 12-foot insectoid creature led a swarm of glowing organisms on. Psionic leashes that pulsed with violet light. And to her right, a hulking gray-skinned biped walked beside a beast that looked like someone had crossbred a tiger with a tank, and then given it extra teeth for good measure. Lena looked down at her carrier crate, where Sir Stomps was currently trying to chew through the latch. "We are going to do just fine," she whispered, though she was not entirely sure she believed it. The registration clerk was a tall, thin being with translucent skin and 4 arms that moved independently as they manipulated holographic data screens, and it peered down at Lena with an expression she had learned to recognize across species as polite confusion. "Species designation of bonded companion?" it asked in translated galactic common. "Mellivora capensis," Lena said. "Honey badger. Earth origin." The clerk blinked all 6 of its eyes and looked at the crate, where Sir Stomps had managed to get one claw through the mesh, and was scratching furiously at the air. Weight classification. About 12 kilograms. The clerk paused and checked something on its screen, then checked again, then looked at Lena as if she might be joking. 12 kilograms, it repeated. "On a good day," Lena confirmed. "He has been stress-eating on the shuttle." The clerk spent the next several minutes trying to find a category for Sir Stomps and failing, because he did not meet the minimum mass requirement for any combat tier, did not qualify as a swarm-type companion since he was very much a single, angry individual, and could not be classified as a psionic bonded entity because he had no psionic abilities whatsoever. He was simply a small furry mammal with a bad attitude and teeth that could crack a tortoise shell. Eventually, the clerk registered him under Novelty, Unranked Companion, and printed Lena a handler badge that was a different color from everyone else's, marking her as someone who was technically participating but not expected to matter. She clipped the badge to her jacket and walked into the main exhibition hangar. The hangar was where handlers gathered between events to socialize and show off their beasts. And Lena realized within 30 seconds that she had walked into a hierarchy as rigid and vicious as anything in nature. The top of the food chain was obvious. A group of Drakshari trainers occupied the center of the space, like kings holding court, their massive reptilian mammalian frames draped in ceremonial armor that matched the plating on their war beasts. And at the center of them all stood trainer Gorath Vel. Gorath was 8 feet of scaled muscle and supreme confidence, and beside him sat Kurnax, his bonded alpha, a 600-kilogram nightmare that resembled what would happen if a grizzly bear and a crocodile had a baby, and then armored it in living metal. And Kurnax's biometallic plates caught the overhead lights, reflections across the hangar, like a walking disco ball of death. Lena walked past them with Sir Stomps on a reinforced tether leash, and the laughter started almost immediately. It was not even mean laughter at first. It was the kind of helpless, delighted laughter that came from genuine disbelief, the sound of apex predator handlers seeing a woman walk a 12-kilogram mammal through a room full of monsters. Gorath noticed her during the evening mixer, when handlers gathered to drink and exchange stories, and he approached with 3 of his protégés flanking him like a small army. "Human," he said, his voice deep enough to rattle Lena's teeth. "I was told your species was sending a representative, but I assumed there had been a mistake when I saw your creature." He gestured down at Sir Stomps, who was straining against his leash, trying to reach a Drakshari warbeast that outweighed him by a factor of 40. "Is this your emotional comfort, larva?" Gorath asked, and his circle erupted in laughter that echoed through the mixer hall. Lena smiled thinly and said nothing because she had learned a long time ago that the best response to someone underestimating you was silence. It cost nothing, and it gave away even less. She noticed something, though, something small that nobody else caught, because nobody else was watching. The Drakshari warbeast that Sir Stomps was straining toward had shifted its weight backward. Not a retreat exactly, but an instinctive micro-flinch, the kind of movement a predator made when something in its hindbrain whispered that the small angry thing in front of it was not behaving the way prey was supposed to behave. Lena tugged Sir Stomps away and returned to her quarters. The room was small and bare, standard temporary housing, with a sleep pod and a nutrient dispensary, and she set Sir Stomps on the floor and watched him immediately begin investigating every corner, with the focused intensity of a bomb disposal expert. She squeezed some raw nutrient gel into a bowl and set it down, and he attacked it like it had personally offended his family. "They do not know what you are, buddy," she said quietly, scratching the spot behind his ear that he tolerated for exactly 4 seconds before snapping at her fingers. She pulled her hand back with practiced ease and leaned against the wall. "Let us keep it that way for now." Sir Stomps ignored her completely and went back to eating. And somewhere deep in the station, the largest and most decorated warbeast in 3 sectors was still shifting its weight in its kennel, unsettled by a memory it could not quite name, the memory of small black eyes that held absolutely no fear. The preliminary assessment rounds began the next morning cycle, and the exhibition hall had been transformed overnight into a series of testing arenas, where bonded companions would be measured and ranked and sorted into tiers like students on the first day at a school, where the curriculum was violence. Lena sat in the handler waiting area with Sir Stomps in her lap, which was not a position he had chosen willingly. She was holding him there with both hands, while he squirmed and growled and tried to bite the reinforced gloves she had learned to always wear when physical contact was involved. Around her, other handlers prepared their beasts with the careful precision of surgeons readying for an operation, whispering commands in bonded languages, feeding specialized nutrient compounds, and performing last-minute grooming on creatures that could have swallowed Lena whole. The first handler called into the arena was a Velith Queenkeeper, a willowy being made of what looked like living crystal, and she commanded a swarm of acid-spitting drones that moved in perfect formation like a deadly cloud of hornets with a chemistry degree. The evaluation process tested 4 categories: aggression response, pain tolerance, threat display, and handler command compliance. And the Velvet Sworn scored brilliantly in all four, because the drones responded to their Queen Keeper with absolute synchronized obedience that made the judges nod in approval. Next came a Cathari handler with a psionic panther, a sleek midnight black predator that could lock eyes with a target and induce complete paralysis through sheer psychic force. And it demonstrated this ability by freezing a testing drone mid-flight and holding it motionless for a full 30 seconds, while the judges marked their scores with visible admiration. Then came Gorath, Vel, and Kernax. The arena seemed to shrink when Kernax entered, because 600 kilograms of biometallic apex loomed over them. Predator had a way of making any space feel too small, and the evaluators went through their tests with the careful respect of people who understood that the barrier between them and the beast was more of a suggestion than a guarantee. Kernax scored the highest threat tier rating in the entire history of the Expo. His aggression response was perfectly calibrated. He could escalate from calm to lethal in under 1 second, and return to calm just as fast at Gorath's command. And his pain tolerance was extraordinary, and his threat display made 2 of the junior evaluators request a bathroom break that everyone politely pretended was not motivated by fear. Gorath walked out of the arena to thunderous applause from the Draxari circle, and he caught Lena's eye across the waiting area, and smiled the way a predator smiles when it already knows how the hunt ends. Then they called Lena's name. She walked into the arena carrying Sir Stomps because he had managed to tangle himself in his leash 3 times during the wait, and she had given up on walking him like a civilized creature. The arena was circular and ringed with sensor arrays that would measure everything from heart rate to neurochemical output, and the evaluation panel sat behind a transparent barrier that Lena sincerely hoped was as strong as it looked. She set Sir Stomps on the ground and unclipped his leash. The first test was aggression response, which involved exposing the beast to escalating threat stimuli, holographic predator projections, sudden loud noises, electromagnetic pulses designed to trigger a fight-or-flight reaction in most known species. Sir Stomps was supposed to display measured, controlled aggression at each escalation level. What Sir Stomps actually did was ignore the holographic predators entirely, locate the physical drone that was generating the stimuli, and attack it. He crossed the arena floor in a blur of gray-brown fur, launched himself at the drone with the single-minded focus of a creature that had identified a problem and decided that the problem needed to die. And within seconds he had his jaws clamped around the drone's sensor array and was shaking it violently while the machine sparked and sputtered. "Sir Stomps, release," Lena called out in the firm voice she used for commands. He did not release. "Sir Stomps, come." He shook the drone harder. "Stomps, I have food." He paused, considered this, and then went back to destroying the drone. The evaluators looked at each other and then looked at Lena, who shrugged with the weary acceptance of someone who had long ago made peace with the fact that her companion operated on his own authority. The pain tolerance test was next, and it involved a calibrated pressure stimulus applied through the floor. Not enough to cause real harm, but enough to make most beasts flinch and reveal their pain thresholds. Stomps stood on the pressure plate, and the stimulus began, and the readings climbed and climbed, and the evaluators waited for the flinch, or the yelp, or the retreat that always came. It never came. Sir Stomps stood on that plate with his usual expression of generalized hostility toward the universe, and showed absolutely no response as the stimulus passed the threshold that would have made a Draxari war beast snarl, and then passed the threshold that would have made a Qatari panther yowl, and then past the threshold where the machine simply ran out of calibration range. One of the evaluators, an elderly insectoid named Assessor Knife, who had been judging these competitions for longer than most species present had been spacefaring, leaned forward in her seat and pulled up the raw data on her personal screen, and what she saw made all 4 of her manipulator arms go still. The honey badger's pain response was not low. It was functionally non-existent. Neural pathways that were supposed to register pain and convert it into a retreat response had been rewired by evolution into something else entirely. Something that took the signal for "this hurts" and translated it into "fight harder." Nayeth flagged the data in her evaluation report and marked it for further analysis. But the head evaluator glanced at it and dismissed it because the creature had scored almost nothing in handler compliance and tactical obedience, which meant it ranked at the very bottom regardless of any other metrics. The final scores were posted publicly on the exhibition board, and Sir Stomps placed dead last in the entire expo, below even a decorative singing fish companion that a Mallory diplomat had entered as a joke. Lena stared at the board and said nothing. Behind her, the Draxhari circle laughed so hard that one of them had to sit down. A young Draxhari trainer named Silvex approached Lena in the corridor afterward with an expression of exaggerated sympathy that fooled nobody. "Human handler," he said, "I could not help but notice your beast's performance, and I want you to know that there is no shame in being outmatched." "That is very kind of you," Lena said. "I have a spare compliance collar that I no longer need," Silvex continued. "It delivers a neural correction pulse when the beast disobeys a command, and I think it could help your creature learn some basic discipline." "Thank you," Lena said, "but the last collar I put on him ended up in 3 pieces inside his digestive tract, so I think we will manage on our own." Silvex blinked and walked away, and Lena returned to her quarters, where she spent the evening reading through the Expo's full rulebook on a borrowed datapad. She found what she was looking for in Section 47, Subsection 12, Paragraph 8, an old rule that stated any registered companion, regardless of tier, could be challenged to a formal dominance bout by a higher-ranked beast's handler, and the challenged party could not refuse without forfeiting their registration entirely. It was a rule designed to let the strong humiliate the weak, a pressure valve that kept the lower ranks from getting too comfortable. And Lena understood immediately that someone was going to use it against her. She was right. The notification arrived on her datapad 2 hours later. Trainer Silvex had formally filed a dominance challenge on behalf of his bonded companion, a 200-kilogram raptor canine hybrid called a Vrenschreik, against the human handler's registered beast. The bout was scheduled for the following day. Lena read the notification twice, set down the datapad, and looked at Sir Stomps, who had somehow gotten into the nutrient dispensary and was eating directly from the tube, with the feral joy of a creature who answered to no authority but his own stomach. "Well, buddy," she said, "someone wants to fight you. Tomorrow." Sir Stomps looked up from the nutrient tube with gels smeared across his face, and made a sound that was somewhere between a hiss and a growl. Lena took that as agreement. The exhibition bout arena was a contained biodome the size of a small city block, ringed with tiered seating that rose up in concentric circles like a coliseum built by a civilization that had perfected the art of watching things hurt each other. Every seat was full, not because anyone expected a good fight. They were here for the comedy, the spectacle of the lowest-ranked creature in the expo being put in a ring with a beast 200 times its threat rating. And the betting boards that floated in holographic display above the arena showed odds of 300 to 1 against the honey badger, which meant that the galactic gambling community had effectively decided the outcome before the fight began. The arena commentators were a pair of Mallory broadcasters with voices like silk poured over gravel, and they had spent the last 10 minutes making jokes at the human handler's expense. "For those just joining us," one of them announced, "we have a special opening bout today that promises to be brief. Trainer Silvex's Vrenschreik, a mid-tier apex specimen with verified kills in 7 sanctioned bouts, will be facing the human entry, a 12-kilogram creature that our research team has classified as a," there was a pause, "a mustelid, which appears to be a category of small omnivorous mammals from a world called Earth. Should be exciting, the other commentator said, and the arena laughed. Lena walked through the competitor entrance with Sir Stomps on his leash, and the laughter followed her like a wave, and she let it wash over her the way she let most things wash over her, with the patience of someone who had survived worse than mockery. On the other side of the arena, Sylvex entered with his Vrenshrike. The Vrenshrike was impressive in the way that purpose-built predators were always impressive. 200 kilograms of lean muscle covered in dark feather fur, with a jaw that could exert enough force to crush bone, and taloned hind legs that could disembowel a target in a single rake, and it moved with the coiled precision of a creature that had been bred and trained to dominate. It saw Sir Stomps across the arena and let out a low territorial rumble that vibrated through the floor. Sir Stomps heard the rumble, and his entire body went rigid, not with fear, Lena knew, but with the sudden electric focus of a creature that had identified something alive and hostile, and had already decided what to do about it. The referee, a neutral species arbiter encased in a protective field, announced the rules. The bout would continue until one beast submitted, retreated, or was rendered unable to fight, and handlers could issue commands but could not physically intervene. Lena knelt beside Sir Stomps and unclipped his leash. "Be smart about this," she said quietly. Sir Stomps was not listening, because Sir Stomps never listened. Deep, resonant tone that rolled through the arena, and the Vrenshrike launched itself forward in a textbook alpha strike, crossing the distance between them in 3 massive bounds, jaws open wide for a spine-targeting bite that was designed to end fights in a single crushing moment. Every predator the Vrenshrike had ever faced had done one of 2 things at this point. They had either braced for impact and tried to fight back, or they had tried to dodge and find a defensive position. Sir Stomps did neither. He ran directly at the charging Vrenshrike. The crowd went silent for half a second as the tiny gray-brown shape hurtled toward the massive predator with the fearless stupidity that could only come from a creature that had genuinely never considered the concept of retreat. And then the Vrenshrike's jaws closed around Sir Stomps with a crack that echoed off the biodome walls. The commentators began to announce the obvious conclusion, and then they stopped. Because Sir Stomps was not dead. Inside the Vrenshrike's jaws, something impossible was happening. The honey badger had twisted, his thick, loose skin rotating around his body like a sleeve around an arm, giving him room to move even inside a bite that should have crushed him, and he was using that room to attack. His claws found the soft tissue inside the Vrenshrike's mouth, the gums, the tongue, the sensitive inner lining that no amount of external armor could protect. And he began to tear at it with the relentless fury of a creature that treated being eaten as a tactical opportunity rather than a death sentence. The Vrenshrike made a sound it had never made before, a high-pitched shriek of pain and confusion, and it shook its head violently, slamming Sir Stomps against the ground once, twice, 3 times, with impacts that would have killed most creatures his size. Sir Stomps held on. The Vrenshrike slammed him again, and he felt something crack along his ribs, but the pain signal that traveled up his nervous system hit his brain, and his brain did something that 4 billion years of Earth evolution had programmed it to do. It translated the pain into rage, and the rage into action, and the action into biting down harder. Blood began to drip from the Vrenshrike's mouth, its own blood. The arena had gone completely silent. The Vrenshrike thrashed and rolled and slammed and tried everything in its considerable arsenal to dislodge the thing inside its jaws. And Sir Stomps rode every impact, like a furious gray rodeo rider, never releasing his grip, never slowing his assault on the soft, vulnerable tissue that the Vrenshrike had helpfully placed him directly next to by trying to eat him. 4 minutes into the bout, the Vrenshrike opened its jaws and threw Sir Stomps across the arena floor. Sir Stomps hit the ground, rolled twice, and got to his feet immediately. He was bleeding from multiple cuts, His fur was matted with saliva and blood, both his and the Vrenshrike's, and one of his legs was not moving quite right. He took one step toward the Vrenshrike, then another, then he charged. The Vrenshrike looked at this, at the small, broken, bleeding thing running toward it again with the exact same fury as before, completely undiminished, completely undeterred. And something ancient and deep inside the Vrenshrike's predator brain made a calculation that no amount of training could override. This thing would not stop. It would never stop. The Vrenshrike took one step backward, then another, and then it turned away from Sir Stomps and refused to face him. The referee's voice cut through the silence. Retreat without re-engagement constitutes concession. Bout concluded. Victory to the challenged party. The arena did not erupt in cheers. It erupted in something much more unsettling, a low murmur of confusion and disbelief that rippled through the crowd like a shockwave, because what they had just witnessed did not fit into any category they understood. In the evaluators section, Assessor Niff pulled up her flagged report from the preliminary rounds and began running deeper analysis with all four arms working simultaneously. And the data confirmed what her instincts had already told her. This creature's relationship with pain was unlike anything in the galactic biological database. High above the arena, in a private viewing box reserved for elite-tier handlers, Gorath Vel sat very still. He was not laughing. He had watched the entire bout on a slowed-down replay, frame by frame, focusing not on the honey badger's attacks, but on its response to damage. The way it absorbed impacts that should have been crippling and simply continued fighting as if they had not occurred. The way its loose skin had turned the Vrenshrike's killing bite into a trap. The way its small size had become an advantage. Advantage inside the larger creature's own jaws. For the first time since he had entered competitive beast handling, Gorath felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear exactly, but the distant relative of fear. The recognition that his understanding of how combat worked might have a gap in it. Sylvex found Lena in the handler corridor afterward, his face twisted with fury. "You drugged that thing," he snarled. "There is no way a creature that size could survive Vrenshrike jaws without biochemical enhancement, and I will have you disqualified." "Go ahead and test him," Lena said calmly. "Blood, tissue, neural scan, whatever you want. He will bite the technician, but you are welcome to try." Sylvex stormed away to file his protest, and Lena scooped up Sir Stomps, who was trying to follow the retreating Vrenshrike scent trail, because apparently winning was not enough and he wanted a rematch. The notification arrived on her datapad that evening. It was not from Sylvex this time. Trainer Gorath Vel, holder of the highest beast companion ranking in 3 sectors, had formally filed an alpha challenge against the human handler's registered creature. Kernax versus Sir Stomps. The challenge could not be refused. Lena read the notification and set it down and looked at Sir Stomps, who was licking his wounds with the casual indifference of someone performing routine maintenance. "That," she said quietly, "is going to be a problem." Lena had 48 hours before the Alpha Challenge, and she spent the first 6 of them doing math that made her stomach hurt. Kernax weighed 600 kilograms, which meant he outmassed Sir Stomps by a factor of 50, and his biometallic armor plating could withstand projectile impacts that would punch through starship hull material, and his jaw pressure had been measured at a force that could crush industrial-grade construction beams. And he had fought 23 sanctioned bouts and won every single one of them, most in under 2 minutes. Sir Stomps weighed 12 kilograms, and his greatest verified achievement was breaking into a triple-sealed food container that Lena had specifically purchased because the manufacturer guaranteed it was animal-proof. She closed the stat comparison and opened the arena footage archives instead. If she could not win on strength, then she needed to win on something else. And the only advantage she had was that nobody had ever seen her. In this galaxy, understood what a honey badger actually was, or how it actually fought. She watched every recording of Kurnax in combat, all 23 bouts, some of them twice, and she looked for patterns the way she had once looked for patterns in enemy troop movements during her military service, with the focused patience of someone whose survival depended on finding the detail that everyone else missed. By the 14th recording, she found it. Kurnax was flawless, but his flawlessness was the problem. Every fight followed the same structure, because every opponent followed the same rules, and the rules were the rules of nature as the galaxy understood them. First came the threat display, where both beasts would show their size and weapons to establish dominance. Then came the testing phase, where they would exchange probing attacks to measure each other's strength. Then came the resolution, where the weaker beast either submitted or was overpowered. Pause. It was logical and predictable, and it worked perfectly against every creature in the known galaxy, because every creature in the known galaxy operated on the same fundamental principle, that self-preservation was the deepest instinct, and that pain was the signal to stop. Sir Stomps did not operate on this principle. Sir Stomps operated on a principle that Earth had been refining for 4 billion years through the most brutal and unforgiving evolutionary crucible in the galaxy. The principle that sometimes the best survival strategy was to be so aggressively unwilling to stop fighting that everything else decided you were not worth the trouble. He did not display, he did not test, he did not submit. He simply attacked whatever was in front of him and kept attacking until it stopped moving or went away. And nothing, not pain, not injury, not being outmatched by every measurable metric, had ever changed this behavior. Anything like that. And Lena was betting everything on the hope that his training would not know what to do with it. Predator species clustering in the upper middle range. The honey badger was not on the chart. I had to expand the scale 3 times, Neith said quietly. His neurological response to pain stimulus does not register on a standard measurement framework, because his nervous system does not process pain as a deterrent signal. It processes pain as a trigger for increased aggression, which means that hurting him does not make him stop fighting, it makes him fight harder. She swiped to the next screen, which showed an analysis of his skin structure. His integument is approximately 6 millimeters thick, and is attached to the underlying muscle with a degree of looseness that allows nearly complete rotational freedom, which means that a predator that bites him cannot hold him in a fixed position, because he can twist inside his own skin to face any direction, regardless of how he is being gripped. Another swipe showed his immune system profile. Carries compounds that can neutralize neurotoxic venoms that would kill organisms 100 times his body mass. Venoms from Earth species called cobras and mambas, creatures that your planet apparently produces in abundance. Nith set the tablet down and looked at Lena with all of her compound eyes, focused in a way that conveyed a very specific emotion across species. The look of someone who had discovered something that frightened them on a fundamental level. What kind of world produces something like this? She asked. Lena leaned back in her chair and thought about how to answer that question in a way that an alien scientist would understand. The kind where everything is trying to kill everything else, all the time, and has been for about 4 billion years, she said. Earth does not have a dominant predator. It has an arms race, and every generation the weapons get sharper and the armor gets thicker, and the things that survive are the things that refused to die no matter what the planet threw at them. She nodded toward Sir Stomps. He is not the strongest thing on our world, or the fastest or the smartest, but he might be the most stubborn thing that evolution has ever produced. And on Earth, that counts for more than size. Nyeth absorbed this in silence, and then asked a question that Lena had not expected. If this creature is not your world's apex predator, then what is? Lena smiled. We are. Nyeth left shortly after with her data tablet and her deeply unsettled expression, and Lena went back to her preparation, though she knew that no amount of planning would matter once the bout started, because Sir Stomps would do what Sir Stomps always did, which was whatever he wanted. Meanwhile, on the other side of the station, Gorath Vel prepared Kernax, with the ceremonial precision of a priest preparing a god for war. Ritual oils rubbed into the biometallic plates, specialized nutrients to sharpen, aggression response, and command bond reinforcement exercises that tightened the neural link between handler and beast. Gorath gave interviews to 3 different galactic media outlets and said the same thing to each of them, that the Alpha Challenge was not about competition, but about responsibility, about ensuring that a dangerous and uncontrolled animal was dealt with before it could cause real harm, and that he bore no ill will toward the human handler who clearly did not understand what she had gotten herself into. He believed every word he said, because Gorath Vel was not a cruel being. He was simply a being who had never encountered something that existed outside his understanding. And when faced with the unknown, he had defaulted to the assumption that it must be lesser. The night before the bout, Lena sat on the floor of her quarters with Sir Stomps. She did not give him a speech, because he was a honey badger, and speeches were wasted on a creature whose entire philosophy of existence could be summarized as, fight everything, and eat whatever is left. She gave him extra food instead, and she scratched the spot behind his ear, and he tolerated it for exactly 4 seconds before snapping at her fingers, and she pulled her hand back with the practiced speed of someone who had been doing this for years. "Just be yourself," she whispered. "That has always been enough." 3 floors below, in the Handler Commons, something strange was happening. A group of alien trainers had gathered around a data terminal and were scrolling through Earth's fauna database with expressions of growing horror. They had started searching after the Vrenschreich bout, curious about what other creatures the human world produced, and what they found was keeping them up past the station's sleep cycle. A creature called a wolverine that could drive bears away from their own kills. A crustacean called a mantis shrimp that could punch with the force of a bullet, and see colors that most species could not even conceptualize. A bird called a cassowary that was essentially a living dinosaur with a blade on its head. A reptile called a saltwater crocodile that had remained virtually unchanged for 200 million years because evolution had looked at it and decided it was already perfect. One of the trainers, a quiet Nethvari who handled bioluminescent serpents, scrolled past entry after entry of creatures that seemed specifically designed by a malevolent universe to be as dangerous as possible, and she stopped and looked up at the others with an expression of dawning realization. "The honey badger," she said slowly, "is not even close to their most dangerous animal." The room went very quiet. "Then what is?" someone asked. The Nethvari scrolled to the entry for Homo sapiens, and turned the screen around so everyone could see the species that had tamed a planet full of nightmares, and then decided to bring one of them to a pet show. Nobody slept well that night. The arena had been expanded to its maximum configuration for the Alpha Challenge, a biodome 300 meters across, with full atmospheric control, sensor arrays embedded in every surface, and seating for 12,000 spectators drawn from every spacefaring species in 3 sectors. Every seat was taken, and every standing spot was claimed, and the overflow crowd watched on holographic displays in the station corridors, because word had spread after the Vrenschreich bout, and what had been a joke had become something else entirely. Not quite a serious competition, not quite entertainment, but something closer to a question that the entire galaxy wanted answered. Could the small thing really do it again? The commentators had changed their tone from yesterday. There were still jokes, but they were nervous jokes, delivered with the careful hedging of beings who had watched the footage and were no longer entirely sure what was going to happen. From the East Gate, and the arena erupted. He was magnificent in his ceremonial armor, 8 feet of scaled muscle, moving with the confidence of a being who had never known defeat. And beside him, Kernax, walked like a living fortress. 600 kilograms of biometallic plating, catching the arena lights and throwing prismatic reflections across the crowd. His massive head, sweeping left and right, with the calm territorial awareness of an apex predator surveying his domain. The crowd roared and stamped, and the sound was like thunder trapped in a bottle. Then the west gate opened, and Lena walked in. She was not magnificent. She wore the same handler jacket she had worn every day of the expo, the one with the patched elbows and the faded Earth Integration Core insignia on the shoulder. And she walked with her bad knee giving her a slight hitch in her stride. And beside her, on his reinforced tether, was Sir Stomps. 12 kilograms of scarred gray-brown fur, with a chipped canine and a missing chunk of ear, and black eyes that looked at the 600-kilogram armored nightmare across the arena, with absolutely nothing in them that resembled fear or caution or sense. The crowd did not roar for Lena. A few beings clapped, uncertain, scattered applause from spectators who were not sure what they were supporting, but felt compelled to acknowledge whatever it was. The referee took position in the center of the arena, inside a reinforced field bubble, and announced the rules. Standard Alpha Challenge protocols. Bout continues until submission, retreat, or inability to fight. Handlers may not intervene. Gorath knelt beside Kurnax and pressed his forehead to his beast's armored snout in the traditional Draxari bond affirmation, whispering commands that tightened their neural link to maximum synchronization. Lena knelt beside Sir Stomps and unclipped his leash. "Okay, buddy," she said. Sir Stomps was all ready. Ignoring her, because he had locked onto Kurnax with the absolute tunnel vision focus of a creature that had identified the largest thing in the room and decided it was a problem. The starting tone sounded. Kurnax began his approach, slow, measured, deliberate, each step a calculated display of dominance that said, "I am larger and stronger and more armored than you, and you should submit now while you still can." And it was the same approach that had opened every one of his 23 victories, because it was designed to trigger the submission instinct that existed in every predator species in the galaxy. Sir Stomps charged. He did not display, he did not posture, he did not hesitate for even a fraction of a second. He simply went from standing still to running at full speed, directly at 600 kilograms of armored death, with the blind, fearless aggression of a creature whose entire evolutionary history could be summarized as attack first, never stop, figure. Out the details later. Kurnax struck. One massive forelimb swept across the arena floor in a blow that carried enough force to flip a ground vehicle, and it caught Sir Stomps square in the side and sent him tumbling across the biodome floor in a rolling tangle of fur and limbs. The crowd gasped. Sir Stomps hit the ground, skidded 3 meters, and got up. He shook himself once and charged again. Kurnax bit down this time, jaws that could crush industrial steel, closed around the honey badger's body with a force that should have ended every organ inside him. And the crowd held its collective breath, waiting for the crunch. It did not come. Inside Kurnax's jaws, Sir Stomps twisted, his skin rotating independently of his skeleton in that impossible Earth-evolved way. And suddenly, instead of a helpless morsel being crushed, Kurnax had a furious whirling weapon inside his own mouth that was raking its claws across his gums and tongue, sensitive inner tissue of his jaw. Kurnax opened his mouth and flung Sir Stomps away. Sir Stomps got up and charged again. The crowd had stopped making noise. The fight continued for 12 minutes, and every one of those minutes was a lesson in the difference between engineered perfection and evolutionary stubbornness. Kurnax hit Sir Stomps with blows that would have killed most creatures in the galaxy, and Sir Stomps got up every time, not because he was tough enough to absorb the damage, because he was taking damage, real damage, his body accumulating injuries that would have put a being 10 times his size into shock. But because the neural architecture of his brain simply did not contain the instruction to stop, he bled and he kept fighting. He limped and he kept fighting. He was thrown and slammed and crushed against the arena floor, and he kept fighting. And each time he got back up, he went for the same targets with the patient, relentless focus of water wearing down stone. The joints where Kernax's armor plates met, the soft gaps under the forelimbs, the thin, vulnerable line along the throat and spine where biometallic plating gave way to muscle and tendon. 6 minutes in, Kernax landed a blow that sent Sir Stomps rolling across the floor, trailing blood. And the honey badger lay still for 2 seconds. 2 seconds where the entire arena held its breath. Then Sir Stomps stood up, and his legs were shaking, and one eye was swollen shut, and he was bleeding from a dozen wounds that painted his gray fur dark red. And he charged again. At the 8-minute mark, something changed in Kernax. It was subtle at first, a hesitation in his strikes, a fraction of a second longer between attacks, a slight drawing back of his head after each blow that was not quite a flinch, but was the ancestor of a flinch. Gorath saw it from the handler position, and his blood went cold, because he had never seen it before. Not in Kernax, not in any beast he had ever trained, and he recognized it for what it was: doubt. Kernax's 200 generations of breeding and his years of combat training all operated on one fundamental assumption: that when something was beaten, it stopped fighting, that pain equaled retreat, that damage equaled submission, and this assumption was being violated over and over and over by a 12-kilogram creature that refused to acknowledge the rules. For the first time in his life, Kernax was facing something his programming had no answer for: an opponent that could not be intimidated, could not be deterred, could not be beaten into submission because it did not understand what submission was. At the 10-minute mark, Kernax began to back away after his strikes instead of pressing forward, and the crowd saw it, and the murmur that ran through 12,000 spectators was the sound of a galaxy-wide assumption cracking. At the 12-minute mark, Kernax reared up. It was a finishing move, a massive overhead strike designed to bring both forelimbs down with crushing force on a downed opponent. And it was the most powerful attack in his arsenal, the move that had ended a dozen bouts, and Gorath screamed a command to execute it, because he knew that if they did not end this now, the doubt would consume his alpha entirely. Kernax rose up on his hind legs, and for one moment his entire body was extended upward, and the biometallic plates along his back and spine shifted with the movement. And the gaps between them, the joints, the seams, the thin lines where armor met flesh along the upper vertebral ridge, opened just slightly. Sir Stomps saw the opening. He had been watching for it with the instinct of a creature whose species had survived by finding the weak points in things 100 times their size, and he launched himself upward off his one good hind leg, with every remaining ounce of energy in his battered body. He hit the gap in Kernax's dorsal plating like a missile made of teeth and fury. His jaws locked on to the exposed vertebral ridge between two armor plates, not the bone itself, but the connective tissue and nerve cluster that ran along the spine, in the one place that biometallic evolution had never learned to protect, because nothing had ever been small enough and crazy enough to reach it. And Sir Stomps did what honey badgers do. He twisted. He wrenched his entire 12-kilogram body sideways with his jaws locked, and his claws digging into the gaps in the plating for leverage. And he put every ounce of force into the rotation. And the sound that followed was the loudest thing Lena had ever heard in a closed space, a crack that echoed off every wall of the biodome and silenced 12,000 voices in an instant. Kernax's hind legs stopped moving. The massive alpha stood frozen for one eternal second, his forelimbs still raised, for the strike that would never land, and then he collapsed forward like a building falling, 600 kilograms of biometallic armor, hitting the arena floor with an impact that Lena felt through her boots, 30 meters away. Sir Stomps tumbled free of the falling body and landed on the arena floor in a heap of blood and matted fur. Kernax lay still, his forelimbs twitching, his hind legs motionless, his massive chest heaving with rapid panicked breaths. Alive, but broken. 2 vertebrae dislocated and the spinal nerve cluster damaged in a way that the Expo's medical team would later describe as catastrophic and irreversible. The undefeated Alpha would never walk on 4 legs again. Gorath's scream cut through the silence as he vaulted the handler barrier and sprinted to Kernax's side, and medical teams swarmed from every entrance, and the arena erupted into chaos. But Lena was not watching the chaos. She was watching Sir Stomps, the honey badger, lay on the arena floor for a long moment, bleeding and broken and breathing hard. And then he pushed himself up on legs that trembled with exhaustion, and he turned away from the fallen giant behind him, and he limped across the arena floor toward Lena. He did not look back at Kernax, because Kernax had stopped moving and therefore was no longer interesting. Lena knelt and picked him up with careful hands, and he tolerated being held for about 6 seconds before squirming weakly, and she held him against her chest and felt his small, fierce heartbeat against her own. The arena was in uproar, screaming, protests, demands for review, and 3 formal challenges to the bout's validity were filed before the medical teams had even stabilized Kernax. Every challenge was dismissed after biochemical analysis confirmed what Lena had always known. Sir Stomps had no enhancements, no modifications, no engineered advantages of any kind. He was simply what Earth produced. When a planet spent 4 billion years trying to kill everything on it, and some things refused to die. In the days that followed, the Expo's governing body convened an emergency taxonomic review, and Assessor Ninth presented her research to a packed chamber with the quiet gravity of a scientist delivering news that would change how the galaxy understood the universe. Earth was reclassified from Juvenile Development World to Class 12 Apex Predation Environment, the highest danger classification in the Galactic Registry, a category previously held by only 2 other worlds, both of which were uninhabited because their ecosystems had been considered too hostile for sapient life to evolve. The fact that humans had not only evolved on such a world, but had become its dominant species, was noted in the official record with a single word that Ninth had chosen carefully: concerning. Gorath Vel found Lena on the last day of the Expo. He was not the same being who had mocked her at the mixer. He was diminished in a way that went deeper than the loss of his alpha, carrying the weight of a worldview that had been shattered by 12 kilograms of spite and stubbornness. He stood before her and asked one question: how do you control it? Lena looked at Sir Stomps, who was in a carrier crate beside her with fresh medical bandages wrapped around his torso that he was already trying to chew off. I do not, she said. That is the secret, Gorath. Humans do not control the things we bond with. We just survive alongside them, and we have been doing it for a very long time. Gorath stared at her, and in that moment the most terrifying thing in the arena was not the honey badger who had broken his alpha's spine. It was the human woman who stood beside that creature without a flicker of fear in her eyes, who had walked into a room full of the galaxy's deadliest war beasts with a 12-kilogram mammal on a leash, and had never once doubted that she belonged there.